Hi, wow, we're almost finished. We've got only one more clue after this one, so this one is a lot of fun. I think you're going to enjoy what I have in store for you. Last month we began, we finished a unit, and I will call these foundations a unit. Hopefully you've got those already by now. This month we're going to finish another unit, so we will end up with 3 units that will make up the body of the quilt, and then those units are multiplied 6 times. Okay, so I told you in clue 5 when we talked about getting these pieces with this little seam that you're going to have coming up the top, that was going to be the most technical part of the whole pattern. So it is a little more complex, but it's not that difficult. I'm not going to bother going this whole length for you. I'm just going to do this part near the point so you see how it's done. So put this on top of here and line up the dots. So I've got my dot here, and I'm going to pull it up till it gets to the dot on the border print, which is the tip of that point. Let me get a pin. I will put it through this dot, and then sharp point's a little cumbersome. So I've got that dot. I'm going to go to the dot here at the point of the star. So those are going to go together like that. I'm going to turn it around, pin this together, and then pin this. Now you want to always work from the border print side because that's where you've got the line to follow. So I'm just going to start here and just go up towards my dot, which is where the pin has come out. I always try to pin so that the point of the pin comes out at the place where the dot is and where I want to stop. So I'm not going to sew up this whole long seam. I'm just going to go from here so you can see the pivot point and how we do that point. But my pin has come out right at the dot, right at the place where the point of that star is. So let me just start down here. So I'm going to just start a little ways down here and then just move towards the point at the place where the pin has come out. Let me just... Now I'm getting close to the point of the pin, so I'm going to do a stitch right up next to it and then pull the pin out. And I've got all the seam allowances to my left. Even if you're sewing by machine, it's not a bad idea to maybe try this part of it by hand because it's a little bit tricky on the pivoting of the point. So I'm right there. I would then open this out. We pretend like we sewed that other seam. I'm going to sew this other little tiny seam last. I'm going to pick up the next piece and put that dot at the point of the border print point. Bring that down here. And if I know I'm at the point, I'm going to pin the rest of it later because I don't want to let go of this. I'm holding tight. I'm going to pull this through where my needle came up onto the next side, just to gather this on, or I mean to attach this part. I'm going to push against the side of the needle and down the next side. And now, while the needle is anchored in here with a few stitches, now I'm going to pin it. It's just that you want to make sure that you have it all pinned properly. That they line up. So I'm going to do a few stitches down this other side so then we can open it and look at the point. And then I do have a finished one. I can show you how it looks all finished. And I'll sew the rest of that seam later. So you see there's that point. Now the last thing to be done is this final little seam. So we're going to go over here, and this is pretty easy. We're just going to butt up the seams, those 2 light colored seams next to each other, stick a pin in there, and then we just start where the stitching left off, and then you'll be able to catch that on either side. Then I'm going to start right where the stitching ended, push my needle in against the side, make sure I'm not on any of the seam allowances, that they're to one side, and then I'm just going to sew up that extra little end piece. Yes, okay, so now I've approached that seam there, and I don't want to sew on the top of the seam or sew it down. If you're doing it by machine, you will have put your seams in which direction you want because you will be sewing on top. And now I'm going to come through the base of that seam to the other side, because with hand sewing it's best not to try to sew the seams down. Then I'm just going to keep going up the side of that seam. One more little stitch. Then I will do my knot. Once again, I come up with the thread to make a small loop, come behind the loop for the extra twist. It gives a little double knot there. And you cut it off. So with that, of course, we would continue on down, but this shows you how you get that nice, perfect point up there. And we would go on down the next side. Now I have one here that's already completed with that point and going down the next side, so you can see how that looks. So now comes the fun, kind of exciting part. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to wait to show you how to sew the foundations onto this bigger unit until after I show you that there's a lot of different ways you can put them together. And then I'll show you how you do that, and I will also show you how you join 6 points to get the nice sharp points in the center. So first and foremost, these foundations, this one is the reverse, this one is the regular, are going to be going on this. You're going to be sewing them on. But you will get a lot of different designs depending on how you orient them. So for instance, right now, this is the way you have it pictured in your pattern, but it's not the only way that it could go together, but it's the way it's pictured in your pattern. This is like your completed wedge. We will have 6 of these all together, and then they will go together in a larger hexagon, and you can see here what that design would look like. Which is very nice design. But what if I told you there's 18, actually 18 different ways these 3 units can go together to create a pattern for you. Some you might like better than others, some I might like better than others, your friend might like others better. And that's part of the mystery and part of the fun of this quilt, because you're going to have fun playing around with your units. I'm going to show you digitally what the various design options look like, and you can have fun getting playing around up with the design board or looking at the digital images to see which one you like the best, and then you can do it that way. So the way the pattern right now is showing it is this way, and you get that one design. However, if I turn each of these, this one is going counterclockwise, this one is going clockwise, because remember they're mirror images of each other, and put those together with this point at the center, now you've got another completely different design. So we've got 2 different designs, but there's 3 corners to these triangles. So if I rotate them one more time like this, I get still yet another design, which you will see up here, and how that looks like when they're all multiples of them put together. So that's 3 different designs before we go back to the original, like this. But wait, there's more. Because what happens if I move the reverse piece over here and the regular piece over here and put all those together, I'm going to, and have this as my center, I'm going to have still a completely different looking design. Now I've got 2 more possibilities with these because there's only one corner I've used, so I can turn them this way, put them together, use this as the center, and here you see what that design looks like. Now I still have one more. I can go like this, turn those again, put those together with this as my center. And now you've seen 6 possibilities for design. That's a lot of designs. Now, let's say of those 6 you found one that you like the best. And you make your wedge. Here's the wedge that I've put together. It's also the one that's shown in your pattern. And you've seen the design that you get from rotating around that center point at the hexagon. Well, we can get another design if we rotate around the upper left corner. We can get almost the identical design on the upper right corner as on the upper left corner. The only difference is that it is reversed. So that's not really going to be too interesting. But the other thing you can do is mirror 2 pieces, and you'll get still a third design. With all the different combinations, just depending on the placement of the foundations, we showed you there were 6 possibilities, but then within each of those 6 possibilities, you have 3 because you've got 3 more corners to rotate it on. And that gives you a total combination of 18 possible designs to complete the quilt. These last 3 designs that I've shown you are used to illustrate the rotation point of the wedge. They are incorporated into these next images of the last 12 designs that you will see here on the screen. So you have now seen all 18 designs that can be made from just those 3 wedges that you've made in this clue. Let's take a second to regroup. We'll call this one page 1. These are the first 6 designs that you saw, and the 3 at the top are the ones that were made with the regular foundation on the right and the reverse foundation on the left. The 3 on the bottom are the opposite. These are the ones that were built with the foundations swapped, with the regular on the left and the reverse on the right. Now we'll call this one page 2. All of the designs on this page are made with the unit or the basic wedge with the foundations on the reverse on the left and the regular on the right. This we'll call page 3. Once again, now these are with the wedges swapped. So you can see the 18 different designs that can be built from just those 3 wedges. So we're going to go back to showing how these pieces get sewn together, and then you're going to have a lot of fun this next month playing around with these units. Can hardly wait. I don't want everybody to do the same one because it's fun to see some of these differences, and some are more graphic, some are more abstract, but it's just a lot of fun and part of the design process of making a quilt. I hope you had fun looking at all those possibilities. Did you find a favorite one that you liked? Well, whenever you do, you can now start putting your units together. You will be sewing one of the foundation units, the twisty things, a regular to one side, a reverse to the other side. And once you've done that, you'll be ready to start putting the wedges together. There's no big, you don't need to see me sew these straight seams. You've seen me sew before. So it's just a matter of putting right sides together, matching the dots and intersections, and sewing your seams up. You will have, no matter which variation of the design that you've chosen to use, you will at some point be putting the 6 wedges together, and there will always be these 6 points to meet in the center. So I am going to show you about that. And the other thing, you'll see as I'm doing the 6 points, I'll be matching the border print. But there will be a time where you might have, depending on which you've chosen, where you might have 2 of these points, these half points on the foundations coming together. And so that's a little more tricky than just sewing these seams together. At this point, I would probably advise taking out, if you've done the foundation pieces, I would take out that last piece just so you can see how to line up the pieces, because it's more important than sewing on the line is to have these pieces exactly lined up. So you would be watching to make sure you get the design lined up properly, pin it carefully, and sew those together. And from my standpoint, I would find it easier to do if the paper wasn't in the way. So that should be fairly straightforward. The only thing now is just joining the 6 points. And it's just a little trick that I use that helps to do it. You've got, we're very careful to cut these all exactly the same as well. So you've got 3 together. Now I've already taken the liberty to sew the other 3 together because you don't need to sit there watching me do the same thing over and over again. So when I'm sewing 6 points together, this is how I go about it. I sew the first 3 points together, and then the second 3 points together, and then 1 long seam across the middle, joining those 2 halves. I've already sewn the first half because you don't need to watch me sewing all this stuff together. But the way I do this, I will start here. I will go towards the center, don't break my thread, pick up the next piece, and go down the next side. So it's one smooth stitching from one to the other. So let me show you how I would sew these. It's not like sewing just 3 plain triangles together because now we have the border print to match. But it's not that hard, and I've just sort of shown you on the other pieces how you go about that. But the main thing is, when you're cutting these out, fabric isn't like a computer printed generated design where everything's going to be perfectly equal. You may have some stretch to the fabric. So even though you think you've cut them exactly the same, they may not be exactly the same. So you want to try to line up the design, more importantly, on these than the cut edges. So I find just some little motif that I can find. These straight lines are a great way, or the design just above the straight line, and you just manipulate the fabric till you get those pieces exactly lined up. You know, just by folding the design back a little bit towards your 1/4 inch, you can see that. Okay, and then I start sewing. I'm going to start here and just follow the seam allowance on the piece facing me. Now it's possible you'll have a little bit less. These actually were pretty straight and came together. But sometimes when you're matching the design, you have a little bit of an issue that the pieces aren't the same, but they'll even out. If it's not the same on one piece, if it's slightly less on this, it'll be more on the other side, and it all evens out. So what I'm doing is I'll pull the pins out as I go, and I'm heading towards the center. You can mark the dots on these triangles. On the one facing you, you don't have to mark on everyone, but you want to stop exactly at the dot. Now I have to confess I don't mark dots. I've been doing this long enough that I can eyeball where that dot is. But if you're new to hand sewing or sewing in general, it's really good to go ahead and mark the dots. So I'm approaching the place up here where the seam allowances will cross. And that'll be the dot where your dot would be. Let me just mark. It's going to be right about there. So you're just going to stop at the dot. and I bring the needle out right at the dot. I also think when you're working with putting border print pieces like this together that it's a little easier to match them up and get a good seam if you do it by hand. But a lot of people do a great job on the machine with that as well. So I don't know if you noticed, I just did a little back stitch right at that dot. Now without breaking the thread, I'm going to open it up. You can see how that design matches where we matched it up there. I'm going to take the last piece and I'm going to line it up once again with the design on the fabric, making sure that they exactly line up. I'm going to put a pin in. Now, I'm demonstrating this with just 3 small triangles because you know, you don't need to see me sewing a bunch of long seams. But when you put these 6 points together, they're going to be part of the wedge. Your wedge is already going to be together, so you will have sewn, you'll take that long seam along the wedge up to the center and do exactly the same thing, only with the bigger piece. So that's why I'm using a smaller one. It just makes it more visually easier for you to see. Okay, so I've got the designs matched up. I'm going to pull the seam allowance to my right that way. Okay, so I can feel that ridge with my thumbnail, and I'm just going to snap off that and put my thumb at the base of the seam, and then I'm going to take the needle where I did not break the thread, and I'm going to go back in the same hole that the thread came out of, only this time I'm going to come through and bring it on top of my thumbnail. I'm going to pull it really, really tight, hold it tight, and then I'm going to put the needle next to that seam and push against it and pivot around and come down the next side. Now I'll finish the seam. I'll show you in a second when I'm finished with it. So I just finished that seam. Now we're going to open it up, and the main thing that you want to look for when you open that up is to make sure you've got a sharp point right. The middle piece forms a sharp point, and that if you pull, you don't get any gap there. So we've got that on this one, you've got it on this one. So now it's time to put the 2 halves together. And it's kind of hard to see how you do it on a printed fabric like this, but it's really important to match up the designs. So once again, I'm going to take the 2 points that are those nice sharp points, put the points right together, line them up, and then I'm going to make sure that the designs match, which they do. And I want you to notice how I have these laid out. The middle piece has the seam allowances going towards the outside, and on this one you want to do the same on the back side. Now, since I've manipulated it, I'm going to make sure one more time that the points are exactly lined up, because I don't want them. And I'll show you how you can tell if they're lined up exactly. You're going to take a pin, put it down below, push beyond the bulk of all those seams and pull it back. And if you can feel it really just snap off those seams, you're pretty sure you're going to catch it. And you go to the back side. Oops, I don't know if you can see, I'm just ever so slightly off. So I did not get those lined up perfectly. So that's where I go back to the drawing board. Make sure that needed to come over just a little bit. Do that. Pin in, pull it out. That felt more normal. Yeah, this time I've come out right at the point where these 2 stitching lines come together. So here again, you're going to want to line up the design, matching the design of the 2 pieces of fabric that are sewing together. And okay, now we're going to start sewing. The first part is like I've sewn already. I'm going to start here, go towards the center. So let me do that much, and then I'll come back to you as I approach the center, because that's the important part that you need to pay attention to. So I've been sewing this seam along, approaching the center, and the center is the, the trickiest part of this, but it's not that tricky. But this is the way you get those nice sharp points to meet in the center. For one thing, particularly when hand sewing, and if you want your nice points, you might want to try this part by hand. But I pull all the seam allowances to my left because I do not want to sew on the seam allowance. If you're sewing seam allowances down when you're hand sewing, and if they're part of your stitching line, it weakens the seams, and then that's when you get gaps and holes. So now, as I approach this, I'm going to come up just before I reach that and do a little back stitch. And I'm going to go beyond all those seams, snap it off, and I'm going to come up right at the dot. And while the needle is still there in place, I'm pulling this pin out. So because the needle is now taken the place of the pin, and I'm going to do another back stitch, go beyond the seam, all those seams, pull it back, let it snap off. You can kind of see it do that. Then I pick up all these seams and I'm going to push them to the right, all to the right, and I'm going to push my thumbnail right up next to that ridge. And I'm going to come through here. And once again, through the base of that seam, come up right on my thumbnail. So it's just kind of through the base of the seam. We haven't touched the back of this yet. We've only been on the top. Now I'm going to touch the back. So I need to pull that super tight. I'm going to nestle my needle right up next to that heavy thickness of all those seams. Go down, I'm catching the back. I come back up again and continue sewing down the next side. Now let me finish this seam and I'll come back and we'll open it up together and see if I did okay. Okay, so I've just finished that seam, so we can now cut the thread. I don't always get it right, so sometimes I have to take it out and do it again if I'm not super satisfied, but you open it up. I would say that's okay. I've got a couple of places where the designs aren't quite exactly, but to me that's good. You don't want it totally perfect because you pick up a leaf off the ground and it's supposed to be symmetrical on both sides. It's never exactly, and that's part of the beauty of it. So that's why I think that you don't have to be absolutely perfect with everything you do in the stitching. So that's how you'll sew your bigger wedges together when you get to the point of deciding what kind of design you want. And this is going to give you a pretty good clue about what the quilt looks like, but next time we're going to finish it off with the edges and the borders. I'm sure you will have figured that out by now how it goes anyway, but if not, you just hold on till next month and we'll finish it up. Good to see you. I hope you're having fun.